They spent their careers uncovering forgotten history, hidden lives, and truths buried for generations. But behind some of television's most familiar documentary faces were personal chapters viewers rarely knew. From family rejection and career pressure to love, loss, and battles over visibility, these stories reveal a different kind of history. And the final names on this list may make you question how much we ever really knew about the men on screen. 1. Michael Feinstein, the keeper of America's songbook. For decades, Michael Feinstein seemed to belong to another America. Grand pianos, Gershwin melodies, elegant theaters, and the songs older viewers once heard drifting from radios and living rooms. He didn't just perform that history, he helped preserve it. After working with Ira Gershwin, Feinstein built a career around protecting the Great American Songbook and later brought that mission to PBS. Viewers knew the music. Far fewer knew how personal the idea of preserving history would become. The surprise was never that he was gay, but how little his polished public image required audiences to know about the man behind it. Feinstein is gay, and in 2008 he married his longtime partner, Terrence Flannery, after 11 years together. Their wedding was public and joyful, but it also represented something that would have been impossible for much of the era whose music Feinstein spent his life celebrating. He had lived long enough to watch gay love move from something rarely acknowledged in polite entertainment culture to something that could be spoken about openly. Then, in 2025, history suddenly stopped feeling safely buried in the past. Feinstein had been invited to conduct, perform, and speak in a Kennedy Center program celebrating 50 years of Pride. The event was abruptly canceled amid a broader collapse of LGBTQ+ programming at the institution. Feinstein did not quietly accept it. He publicly described what was happening as censorship based on sexual orientation. That is what makes his story so uncomfortable. A man who dedicated his life to saving American cultural memory was now arguing that part of American cultural memory was being pushed out of view. Was this simply a programming decision? Or was it a warning about which histories powerful institutions still consider acceptable? And if a straight performer can celebrate a lifetime of love on stage without controversy, why can a gay artist's history suddenly become a political? Tell us what you think in the comments. Was Feinstein defending art? Or fighting a much larger battle over who gets included in American history? 2. Rocca, the historian of forgotten lives. If you watch CBS Sunday Morning, Rocca was the kind of face that made history feel harmlessly charming. He could turn an obituary, a forgotten president, an old invention, or a strange corner of American culture into a story worth staying for. That fascination became Mobituaries, a project built around one idea. People in stories disappear when nobody bothers to remember them. But for years, viewers knew far more about the forgotten people Rocca rescued than they knew about one very ordinary fact about Rocca himself. In 2011, at 42, he publicly said he was gay. The moment was not a dramatic television confession. There were no tears under studio lights and no scandalous revelation. Rocca simply explained that he had finally become more comfortable with himself. That quiet sentence may say more about his generation than a louder coming out story ever could. Before that announcement, the advocate noted that there had already been years of is he or isn't he speculation around him. Think about the pressure hidden inside that phrase. A television personality can talk freely about presidents, death, religion, family, and history, while strangers keep debating a personal truth he has not chosen to discuss. His story becomes more striking because faith never disappeared from the picture. Educated at a Jesuit school, He later stood at Madison Square Garden during Pope Francis's 2015 Mass and delivered a scripture reading in Spanish. An openly gay broadcaster stood only feet from the Pope while thousands watched. Maybe Rocca was never hiding in the dramatic way audiences imagine. Maybe privacy and fear can look much quieter, waiting until you finally feel comfortable enough to stop letting other people guess. So, why were viewers surprised at all? Did television teach us to assume every familiar male host was straight until told otherwise? And is coming out at 42 late, or simply evidence of the world in which he came of age? Let us know in the comments. Was Rocca protecting a secret, or protecting something that was always his to reveal on his own terms? 3. David Starkey, the historian who could challenge kings. David Starkey built his television reputation by sounding almost impossible to intimidate. Kings, queens, ministers, he dissected them with the confidence of a man who seemed to believe every argument could be won with enough evidence. For viewers of Tudor and monarchy documentaries, that sharpness became his trademark. But the most painful chapters of Starkey's life were not debates he could control. When he came out to his parents, Starkey later said the truth effectively destroyed his relationship with his mother. His father reacted differently. He went out, bought a book about homosexuality, read it, and tried to understand his son. It is a tender detail inside a brutal family story. One parent pulling away, the other awkwardly trying to learn. Years later, Starkey found stability with publisher and book designer James Brown. They were together for 21 years. Behind the combative television persona was a partnership viewers rarely saw. Then, in 2015, Brown died at only 43. Starkey canceled engagements after the loss. He later said that James had died alone and that he was the one who found him. Suddenly, the historian who explained death, betrayal, and power was facing a history no scholarship could make less final. Starkey's story is complicated further by his own later public controversies. His career suffered serious consequences after racist remarks in 2020. Consequences that were about those remarks, not about being gay. That distinction matters. Sympathy for the rejection and grief he experienced does not require excusing everything he later said. And perhaps that is why his story belongs here. Human beings are rarely as simple as heroes or villains. Can we condemn a man's public words while still feeling compassion for the private losses that shaped him? Did his mother's rejection reflect a generation or a choice? And when viewers learned that the fierce historian they watched for years went home to a man he loved for 2 decades, why should that still surprise anyone? Tell us in the comments. Can understanding someone's pain coexist with holding him accountable? 4. Arthur Dong, the filmmaker who looked hate in the eye. Before Arthur Dong ever sat across from convicted killers, he already knew what anti-gay violence felt like. In 1977, walking in San Francisco with a friend, he was chased by men shouting anti-gay slurs. Dong escaped by throwing himself onto the front of a passing vehicle and holding on as it carried him away. A priest nearby was not as lucky. He was badly beaten. Years later, when Dong tracked that man down, the terror of that night came flooding back. The filmmaker, who had spent his career documenting other people's pain, realized he had never truly left his own behind. But Dong refused to let fear write the ending. By the 1990s, he had already earned an Oscar nomination and directed Coming Out Under Fire, exposing how gay and lesbian Americans served in World War II, while the military treated their identities as a threat. Then he went somewhere far darker. For License to Kill, Dong entered prisons and sat face-to-face with men convicted of murdering gay people. These were not actors. They were men whose hatred had ended lives. Dong listened as they talked about religion, masculinity, shame, fear, and the belief that violence could somehow restore their manhood. He later said he made the film because he refused to remain a victim. Imagine carrying the memory of being hunted through a city street, and then voluntarily locking yourself in a room with men who had done worse to people like you. Was that courage, obsession, or a desperate attempt to understand why he had been hated in the first place? Dong could have chosen safer stories. Instead, he kept returning to the places where gay lives collided with family rejection, military exclusion, and violence. Perhaps happiness for him was never about forgetting what happened. Maybe it was about refusing to let the people who frightened him decide what kind of life he would live. What do you think? Should a filmmaker give killers a platform in order to expose how hatred is created? Or are some voices too dangerous to amplify? And after surviving that kind of violence, doesn't a man deserve the right to live without having to prove his courage again? 5. Eric Marcus. The journalist television wouldn't put on camera. Eric Marcus wanted what thousands of young journalists wanted: a national television career. He had studied journalism at Columbia, worked at CBS News, and imagined himself becoming a correspondent. But there was one problem he could not edit out of the picture. He was openly gay. Marcus has recalled being warned in journalism school that being out could destroy his career. At CBS in 1988, he finally asked an executive the question hanging over his future. Would the network ever put an openly gay person on camera as a national news correspondent? The answer, he says, came back no. There was another option. He could have tried to disappear back into the closet. He knew what that felt like. Marcus has described how miserable he was when he had to lie, invent stories, and remember which version of his life he had told to whom. For a brief period, he even went back into the closet for a political job. He lasted 6 weeks, and all of this was happening while AIDS was tearing through New York. Marcus has remembered friends and neighbors falling ill and dying. One close friend, Carl Wesner, died in 1985. He was trying to build a future while men his age were vanishing around him. So Marcus walked away from the television career he had wanted and took a tape recorder into living rooms across America. There was no internet, no ready-made LGBTQ history timeline, and very few books to guide him. He recorded the people whose memories might otherwise disappear. Decades later, those old cassettes became making gay history. Think about the irony. Television would not give an openly gay journalist the future he imagined, so he preserved a past television had largely ignored. Was leaving CBS a defeat, or the decision that made his real legacy possible? Should he have been expected to hide who he was just to earn the same on-camera opportunity as a straight colleague? And how many talented people from that era quietly made the opposite choice? Tell us in the comments. If telling the truth about yourself could cost you the career you had worked for, would you stay silent or walk away? 6. Thomas Allen Harris, the producer who refused to let a community disappear. In 1989, Thomas Allen Harris was a young, openly gay black producer at WNET, New York's PBS station, watching two crises unfold at once. AIDS was killing his friends and colleagues, and television, the medium that claimed to document America, was still failing to show parts of the country he knew. Harris saw something especially painful. Even when AIDS received national attention, Black communities were often pushed to the edge of the story. The lives he knew could seem almost invisible beside the narrow images mainstream media repeatedly chose to show. So Harris pushed back from inside public television. He produced programs such as Arts and AIDS and Art and Politics, bringing activists, artists, and people ignored by mainstream coverage into the center of the conversation. That meant challenging executives over what belonged on television at all. His own account says the programs helped break open the narrative. But executive pushback and corporate media limits eventually drove him to suspend his public TV work. There is no evidence PBS simply fired him for being gay. The conflict was deeper and more revealing. He was an out black producer fighting over whose suffering television considered important enough to see. Years later, Harris returned to those buried tapes and turned them into About Face, revisiting the young producer he had once been. Then, PBS viewers met him again as host of Family Pictures USA. Using family photographs to uncover history's official archives often miss. That may be the deepest irony of his career. The man who once fought to put overlooked lives on television eventually built a series around the idea that ordinary families are history. How many stories vanish because an executive decides they are too uncomfortable or too political? Was Harris difficult? Or was television simply not ready for the America he was trying to show? After watching friends disappear while fighting to make their lives visible, didn't he deserve the chance to return on his own terms? Tell us below. When media calls itself neutral, who gets erased first? And who gets to decide? 7. Simon Callow, the truth the press wouldn't print. Long before Simon Callow became the booming, unforgettable face, audiences knew from 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Dickens programs, and documentaries about Orson Welles. He was trying to tell the truth about himself, and discovering that other people thought silence was safer. Callow has said that during a 1980 National Theatre production, a program note mentioned his sexuality. A press officer objected, warning that printing the word gay could ruin his career. Even stranger, Callow says he later came out repeatedly in interviews, only to watch journalists simply leave it out. Everyone seemed to understand the rule: a gay actor could exist, but perhaps not too publicly. His mother was no refuge. When Callow finally told her, she said she did not want to discuss it. He had grown up seeing homosexuality described as furtive, shameful, even a life sentence of loneliness. Yet, hiding began to feel worse than whatever openness might cost him. So, in 1984, Callow put it in his own book, Being an Actor. Friends warned him he might never work again. He decided he could no longer live with that threat hanging over him. Years later, he called coming out one of the most valuable things he had ever done. The punishment did not vanish with time. Callow later revealed that he still received hate mail because of his sexuality, and warned that homophobia had never disappeared as completely as people like to imagine. And then came a chapter his younger self may never have expected. In 2016, at 67, Callow married Sebastian Fox. The man once warned that honesty could destroy his career had lived long enough to make his love legally ordinary. Was Callow reckless for risking everything? Or was the real cruelty expecting him to lie just to remain employable? And after decades of being told openness was dangerous, didn't he deserve happiness without explanation? Tell us below. If telling the truth about yourself might cost your career, would you still say it out loud? 8. Stephen Fry, the wit that couldn't silence the darkness. Stephen Fry could make intelligence look effortless. On television, he seemed almost indestructible. Witty, educated, charming enough to guide viewers through language, America, history, and culture without ever losing control of the room. But as a young gay man, one historical figure terrified him. Oscar Wilde. Fry has said that learning how Wilde was imprisoned, disgraced, and exiled for homosexuality hit him like a hammer blow. To a young boy already aware of his own sexuality, Wilde seemed to offer two messages at once. A gay man could be brilliant, and society could still destroy him for it. Fry eventually came out publicly in the 1980s, but visibility did not magically create happiness. He has spoken about feeling deeply undesirable, hating gay clubs because he felt judged and rejected, and throwing himself into work. His darker battles were not simply caused by being gay. Fry lives with bipolar disorder, was diagnosed after a devastating breakdown in 1995, and has spoken openly about suicidal crises. That distinction matters. A man can fight homophobia and still carry other wounds no amount of public acceptance can cure. Instead of retreating, Fry eventually turned his visibility outward. In Stephen Fry, out there, he confronted anti-gay prejudice internationally, meeting people living under laws and cultures where openness could carry consequences far more severe than bad headlines. Then something quieter happened. In 2015, Fry married Elliot Spencer. Their 30-year age gap drew enormous attention, but Fry later said the stability of marriage helped him manage his bipolar disorder and left him calmer and happier. Perhaps that is the hidden chapter viewers missed. The man who seemed happiest entertaining everyone else had spent years struggling to believe he could be happy himself. Should audiences judge an unconventional marriage if the people inside it find peace? And after surviving shame, loneliness, breakdowns, and public scrutiny, doesn't Stephen Fry deserve the same ordinary happiness everyone else takes for granted? Tell us in the comments. Did his marriage surprise you? And should the age difference matter at all? 9. Dave Karger, the TCM host who inherited more than old movies. For millions of classic film fans, Turner Classic Movies feels less like a channel than a memory. Dave Karger stepped into that world carefully. He first appeared with Robert Osborne in 2007, guest hosted in 2016, and became an official TCM host in 2018. By then, he had already spent years covering Hollywood and the Oscars, but the most interesting thing about Karger may be what his presence on TCM quietly represents. Karger is openly gay. He was named to the Out 100 in 2014, and there is no verified story that TCM punished him, forced him into the closet, or threatened his career because of who he loved. And that absence of tragedy is exactly the point. Think about the Hollywood Karger spends his career explaining. An industry where queer stars often hid relationships, studios controlled images, and private truth could threaten a carefully manufactured career. Karger now sits in front of those same movies as an openly gay host, speaking with the calm authority once reserved for men whose private lives were rarely questioned. Even his path there was unexpected. A college screening of Laura helped turn him toward classic cinema. Years later, he would become one of the people trusted to keep that history alive. In 2024, his book 50 Oscar Nights went behind the polished speeches to ask winners what those defining nights actually felt like. Maybe Karger's hidden chapter is not one of ruin. Maybe it is evidence of change. Should every LGBTQ story require suffering to matter? Or is seeing a gay man simply grow older, love openly, and become a trusted guardian of Hollywood history its own kind of victory? Tell us below. Is quiet visibility sometimes more powerful than a dramatic coming-out story? 10. Mark Gatiss, the man who turned hidden gay history into television. Mark Gatiss built a career around ghosts, monsters, murder, and forgotten corners of British history. American viewers may know him as Mycroft Holmes in Sherlock, a Doctor Who writer, or the host of A History of Horror. But the most revealing history he eventually explored was one that once forced men like him to live carefully. Gatiss is gay and has shared his life with actor Ian Hallard for years. He has spoken about growing up in the 1970s and 80s with few openly gay role models who were allowed to be fully themselves. Some were visible, he recalled, but often only after being made harmless enough for mainstream television. That history became part of his work. In 2017, Queers marked 50 years since the partial decriminalization of sex between men in England and Wales. Then came Bookish. Set in 1946 and brought to PBS in 2026, Gatiss plays Gabriel Book, a gay former spy living in a lavender marriage with his closest female friend. Gatiss objected when the character was described simply as closeted. His point was sharper. Book is not ashamed. He just has to be careful. That distinction says almost everything. There was a time when happiness for gay men could require coded language, false appearances, or a marriage built partly for protection. Gatiss now gets to put that history on television openly, while living a life earlier generations could barely imagine. So perhaps the final surprise in this video is not that these men were gay. It is how confidently audiences assumed they were not. These men taught us that history is never as simple as the version we first inherit. Some faced rejection, some lost people they loved, and others had to decide when it was finally safe to live openly. But perhaps the real lesson is this: privacy is not dishonesty, and happiness should never require an apology. Which story surprised or moved you the most? Tell us in the comments. And thank you for watching Silent Fame.